Welcome to the Dark Docket, podcast where we explore the shadowy intersection of law, the supernatural, and dark history. I'm your host, Aidan, and today we're delving into the fascinating case of Helen Duncan, the last person to be imprisoned under Britain's Witchcraft Act. Before we turn to the matter at hand, I need to share an important disclaimer. Nothing you hear on this show should be construed as legal advice. We're here to entertain and intrigue, not to provide professional legal counsel. If you're facing a legal issue, please consult with a qualified attorney, duly licensed in the appropriate state. Furthermore, while we strive for accuracy, the primary purpose of this show is entertainment. As such, we can't guarantee the complete historical accuracy of all facts and stories presented. Some details may be dramatized or simplified for narrative effect. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. But remember, we're here to spark your imagination, not to solve your ghostly legal disputes. Now let's journey back to World War II Britain and the trial that would become known as the Last Witch Trial. Helen Duncan was born in Callander, Perthshire, Scotland in 1897. From a young age, she claimed to have psychic abilities, often frightening her classmates with predictions. As an adult, she began conducting seances, during which she would allegedly produce ectoplasm and materialize spirits of the dead. Duncan's rise to prominence as a medium came during a time of great interest in spiritualism. The devastating losses of World War I had left many seeking comfort in the idea of communicating with deceased loved ones. However, Duncan's practices were not without controversy. In 1931, the London Spiritualist Alliance invited the famous psychical researcher Harry Price to investigate Duncan. Price's findings were damning. He concluded that Duncan's ectoplasm was actually cheesecloth that she had swallowed and thrown up during seances. He also noted that the spirits she materialized were often crude puppets or masks. Despite this exposure, Duncan continued her work as a medium. She maintained a loyal following who believed in her abilities, even as skeptics denounced her as a fraud. But it was during World War II that Helen Duncan's activities caught the attention of British authorities in a way that would change her life forever. In November 1941, Duncan held a seance in Portsmouth, where she claimed to have contacted the spirit of a sailor from the HMS Barham. The spirit allegedly told attendees that the ship had been sunk. This was a problem, because the sinking of the HMS Barham was actually classified information, not yet revealed to the public. Prior to the seance, the Royal Navy had indeed lost a ship named the HMS Barham to a German U-boat attack on November 25, 1941. Some 800 souls were lost during the attack. However, to maintain morale and prevent the Germans from knowing the effectiveness of their attack, the Admiralty had only informed the families of the deceased and had not made a public announcement yet about the ship. Duncan's apparent knowledge of this classified information set alarm bells ringing. How had she known about the sinking? Was she somehow receiving leaked information? Or was there a more sinister explanation? These questions put Duncan on the radar of the British Navy and police. Authorities began to view her not just as a fraudulent medium, but as a potential threat to national security. In an era of spy paranoia, where posters warned that careless talk costs lives and loose lips sink ships, Duncan's seances were seen as a possible conduit for enemy intelligence. On January 19, 1944, the authorities decided to act. Undercover police officers attended one of Duncan's seances in Portsmouth. As the seance progressed, and a white, shrouded figure appeared, claiming to be a materialized spirit, the officers pounced. They grabbed the figure, revealing it to be Duncan herself, draped in a white cloth. Duncan was arrested, along with 3 of her associates, after completing an investigation that turned up little in the way of evidence of spying on Duncan's part, i.e., no radios, dead drops, or evidence of secret messages being passed to Duncan with sensitive information. The authorities were left with a situation that was stickier than ectoplasm. Here was someone who potentially had access to classified information, and it was not obvious how she got it. Any other spy would simply be charged under the Official Secrets Act, provided you could prove they were a spy. So here's where the case takes an unusual turn. Instead of being charged simply with fraudulent mediumship, something that had been an offense since Parliament passed the 1824 Vagrancy Act, which made fortune-telling, astrology, and spiritualism punishable offenses with up to 3 months of hard labor, instead, Duncan was charged under the Witchcraft Act of 1735, which allowed for imprisonment for up to 1 year per offense. If you think that sounds archaic, just keep in mind that the Witchcraft Act was originally passed with the intention of ending the witch hunts and executions that had plagued so much of Europe during the medieval ages. Fun fact, John Conduit, the main promoter of the Witchcraft Act, was married to the niece of Sir Isaac Newton, who was the father of modern science, although he was also very interested in the occult and the mysterious art of alchemy. Nevertheless, the Witchcraft Act made it illegal to claim to have magical or spiritual powers. Specifically, Section 4 of the Act, under which Duncan was charged, prohibited pretending to exercise or use any kind of witchcraft, sorcery, enchantment, or conjuration, or undertake to tell fortunes. The choice to use this archaic law, as opposed to the other archaic laws available, which carried lighter sentences, has led many to speculate about the real motives behind Duncan's prosecution. Was it merely a convenient legal tool, or was there a deeper agenda at play? The trial began at the Old Bailey in London on March 23, 1944. The prosecution, led by John Maud, painted Duncan as a fraud who was potentially threatening national security. They presented evidence of her fake ectoplasm and called witnesses who had attended her seances and been disillusioned. One key witness was Kathleen McNeil, wife of a Royal Artillery lieutenant. She testified that during a seance, Duncan had claimed to materialize the spirit of her sister, who had died in a car accident. However, Mrs. McNeil's sister was very much alive, exposing Duncan's deception. The prosecution also focused on the HMS Barham incident, suggesting that Duncan's knowledge of the sinking could have been dangerous if it had reached enemy ears. However, they stopped short of accusing her of outright espionage. Duncan's defense team, led by Charles Losby, argued that she genuinely believed in her abilities and that the use of the Witchcraft Act was a miscarriage of justice. They called spiritualists to testify about the reality of mediumship and argued that Duncan was being persecuted for her beliefs. Losby also attempted to have Duncan demonstrate her powers in court, but the judge, Sir Gerald Dodson, refused this request. This decision remains controversial, with Duncan's supporters arguing that it denied her the opportunity to prove her abilities. The trial lasted 7 days and captured the public's imagination. Newspapers reported on it extensively, with opinions divided between those who saw Duncan as a fraudster and those who believed she was being unfairly persecuted. On March 31st, 1944, the jury returned their verdict. Helen Duncan was found guilty on count 1 of the 7-count indictment against her, which charged her with pretending to exercise or use any kind of witchcraft, sorcery, enchantment, or conjuration, contrary to Section 4 of the Witchcraft Act, 1735. Judge Dodson sentenced Duncan to 9 months in Holloway Prison. In his sentencing remarks, he stated, "The sentence of the court upon you is that you be imprisoned for 9 months. I hope the sentence will not be taken as a demonstration of the belief in witchcraft. The reason for the long sentence is that I hope it will prevent you from practicing your wicked art in the future." The verdict caused an uproar in spiritualist circles, and even drew criticism from some members of Parliament, who saw it as an embarrassing use of an outdated law. Winston Churchill, then Prime Minister, wrote to the Home Secretary calling the use of the Witchcraft Act obsolete tomfoolery. Duncan's conviction likely contributed to the repeal of the Witchcraft Act, which was replaced by the Fraudulent Mediums Act in 1951. This new law focused on intentional fraud, rather than claims of supernatural powers, reflecting a more modern approach to such matters. The case of Helen Duncan raises fascinating questions about the intersection of law, belief, and national security. Was Duncan truly a threat, or merely a convenient scapegoat? How do we legally navigate claims of supernatural abilities? And what role should centuries-old laws play in modern jurisprudence? Helen Duncan's story doesn't end with her release from prison, though. Despite promising to stop practicing as a medium, she continued to hold seances. In 1956, police raided another of her seances in Nottingham. Duncan fell ill shortly after the raid and passed away 5 weeks later, on December 6, 1956. Some of her supporters claimed the shock of the raid had killed her. Her death certificate, however, listed the cause of death as diabetes mellitus and acute myocardial failure. So how did Helen Duncan know about the sinking of the HMS Barham? Well, it should be noted that many of the sailors who were on the HMS Barham came from the Portsmouth area, which is where the seance was held. Duncan was operating in Portsmouth. That would have given her ample opportunity to potentially have interacted with some of the family members of the deceased. Furthermore, she didn't really have to know. Mediums often engage in something called cold reading, which is a technique used by psychics, mediums, and mentalists to gather information about a person without prior knowledge. Key aspects include making high-probability guesses, quickly analyzing reactions, emphasizing correct guesses, encouraging subject participation, using vague or widely applicable statements, fishing for information, and downplaying incorrect guesses. The method relies on the subject's willingness to interpret vague statements as personally meaningful. So, while impressive, cold reading is based on psychology and observation, not supernatural abilities. If you're interested in learning more about cold reading or the feats that you can accomplish while using it, check out Darren Brown on YouTube. He's a British performer who specializes in the use of techniques like cold reading and neurolinguistic programming to perform tricks of the mind instead of magic tricks. Duncan's conviction remains a subject of debate. Her supporters have repeatedly campaigned for a posthumous pardon, arguing that she was unjustly prosecuted. In 1998, her granddaughter, Mary Martin, even presented a petition to the Home Secretary asking for Duncan to be exonerated. However, these efforts have so far been unsuccessful. The trial of Helen Duncan serves as a reminder of how the law can be used in unexpected ways during times of national crisis. It also highlights the ongoing tension between skepticism and belief in the supernatural, a tension that continues to play out in society at large. As we close this episode, I encourage you to reflect on the complexities of Duncan's case. How would such a trial play out today? What does it tell us about the evolving relationship between law and the supernatural? And how do we balance national security concerns with individual rights and freedoms? For example, if a medium today revealed sensitive or classified information to the public, would they be able to rely on the protection of whistleblower laws? The case of Helen Duncan, the last person imprisoned under the Witchcraft Act, stands as a fascinating footnote in legal history. It reminds us that the law, like society itself, is constantly evolving, sometimes in ways we might not expect. Join us next time on The Dark Docket as we explore another fascinating case from the shadows of legal history. Until then, remember, whether witches exist or not, witch hunts never seem to go away.